We are back, and we are ready to review some movies for you, and we're going to kind of take a step aside from movie reviews, and we're going to do a review of a documentary. It came out many, many years ago. If you're a fan of rock and roll, if you're a fan of Foo Fighters, you might enjoy this next documentary. It's called Back and Forth, and we've got Jake here to kind of go through the details of this and kind of figure out if it's any good or not. So, Jake, Back and Forth, Foo Fighters documentary. First off, are you a fan of the Foo Fighters?
You could say I'm a fan of the Foo Fighters, and I really am more of a fan of what the Foo Fighters stand for in this current day and age, and that's just a straightforward rock and roll band that people like, which seems to get hard people to like rock and roll these days. So
they're not. You can't put them in the category of like a U2 where you're trying to be something more than you are, right?
Yeah. I mean, they're
just simple rock and roll,
just simple, and Dave Grohl just seems to have fun with the band.
Yeah,
it's like recording albums in garages and basements and
doing it on tape and
having fun with it. Just having fun putting together records.
But like every band, like every human being, there's some turbulation and some fights and stuff like that. Yeah. And this documentary kind of delves into it. So this documentary, Back and Forth, is pretty much a straightforward documentary. It starts from the very beginning and just kind of follows the steps on a timeline, right?
Yeah, it kind of starts at the point of the recording of Nevermind when Dave Grohl joined Nirvana as the drummer, and then the subsequent years, and then, of course, after Kurt Cobain's demise, for lack of a better term. And then, he just kind of putting this album together just because he wanted to keep playing music.
Yeah, and he did all the instruments. He did all the singing. It was his record.
Yeah.
And he didn't want anybody really to know who it was to begin with, so he just kind of made up a name and said, all right, call it Foo Fighters or something.
Yeah.
But he wanted to do more with it, so he was kind of scouring. I don't want to say scouring, but keeping an open eye for possible musicians to start a group together. And he found the bass player and the drummer from another band in Seattle and said, hey, you want to come?
What was it? Sunny Day Real Estate? Is that the name of the band?
Yeah.
So, it found him a couple other musicians that he liked. Just saw him at a show, like, oh, hey, come play with me. And then, of course, Pat Smear had involvement with Nirvana during their touring days, so he brought them in. So he put together a 4-piece loud band. Yeah,
and they got to a good run, and they toured.
Exactly.
They toured, and obviously I think that put some strain on the band, and you could see it by the time they got to their second album.
Yes, and indeed, and this documentary did a really good job, and it's really well paced. That's one thing I got to say for it is you don't ever feel like, oh, I'm just ready for this part in this documentary. I'm ready for the quit talking about this.
Right.
They hit on things in a direct way, but not just like breezing over it. It's like, this is what we're going through right now, and this is what you need to know. And really, it seems like you got some really honest reactions from maybe some of the members of the band that had left or had been forced out of the band for different reasons. It seemed like, well, I'm going to be a part of this. I'm not sure why I got kicked out of the band, but
Yeah, you see that with the second album. You see Dave Grohl, and he's got this cool, awesome, nice persona. He seems like the kind of guy you can go up to and be like, "Hey, man, you want to have a beer together?" or something like that.
Exactly.
But like you, like me, like everybody, he's got his bad moments. He's got his egotistical moments, and he had it with the second album where he wasn't digging the drum parts that the current drummer was filling. So he kind of went behind his back and redid those drum parts and didn't tell him.
And you know what? When you're Dave Grohl and you've been, labeled as one of the best drummers in the world,
right?
You can kind of do that. And you kind of, if you're another, a lesser drummer to some degree, and you're just like, okay. That's I think there could have been a little bit of understanding there.
But the thing was like, Dave's like, you can still tour with this if you want. And the guy was like, no, I'm done. But that led to the discovery and the arrival of Taylor Hawkins, who was a drummer for Alanis Morissette, and they kind of wooed him over to the Foo Fighters, and Taylor's like Dave Grohl, only blonde.
Exactly. I mean, they're like to the same guy.
Yeah.
They seem like they're like these two brothers, you know?
Yeah.
It's like as soon as Taylor was in the band, it seemed like, okay, it's Dave and Taylor's band.
Yeah. And I love the scene where the bass player, Nate, is he's talking and he's like, oh, man, not another one of these guys. Isn't one enough, you know? And then they hire another guitarist, and it didn't work out with the other guitarist, so they hired Chris Shiflett, I think is his name. Yeah. And he's an amazing guitarist, and he's still with them. And Patch Smear came back, so we've got the Foo Fighters that we know and love now. And at the very end of the documentary, they do something a little different. Instead of kind of going into a closure moment, they kind of preview the making of their current album at that time.
Yes, exactly. And go through the that was Wasting Light, was it, or was it the one before?
I think it was Wasting Light.
Yeah,
yes.
I think it was doing that's the one they did in the garage, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So they were kind of going through that, and then of course it kind of ends with their show at Wembley Stadium too.
Yeah.
Which was a really that's a big moment for any band if you can fill a stadium at that size.
Yeah, that was incredible.
I don't know what it is with the Brits, but they, the English or the
they
Europeans,
love rock and roll.
They
man.
love
they really
rock and
do.
roll, and they love huge stadiums. So
yeah.
there might have to be something to do with soccer right over there, or football.
I don't know. It's amazing. Like you can't hardly get 20,000 people to see a rock show here in the States, but you can get 70,000 people to see it over in London. It's definitely an interesting phenomenon for sure. Foo Fighters documentary, all in all, is this something that you can revisit over and over again? I know you like documentaries like It Might Be Loud. We've done that one before. That's one you can revisit. Is this one for you personally that you think you can revisit in the future?
Oh, I think so. I think it's got some rewatch ability to it for sure. Especially just because it's really well paced. It doesn't linger. I mean, I recently watched the Tom Petty documentary.
You finished that?
I finished that, and it's like 4.5 hours long. It took me about a week of watching it, about half-hour doses. But yeah, that one I don't know if I could watch through it again. It was a really good documentary,
right?
But it was just a little long in the tooth.
Speaking of Tom Petty, in this documentary, after Kurt Cobain passed away, Dave Grohl got offered a job to play drums with Tom Petty.
Yeah, drums that was during the Wildflowers album,
so.
I think.
I think so.
Yeah, and I think he did one show with him on Saturday Night Live, and then moved on.
He said no. He's like, no.
Can't do it.
So anyway, if you're a fan of the Foo Fighters and you haven't, checked that documentary out, definitely do so. Obviously, some of the things might be dated because, they're saying, this is the most current album they've done, 2 or 3, since then.
Yeah. And more documentaries.
More documentaries, too, especially the one on HBO, Sonic Highways.
Yes.
Really, really well done. I think that one's actually better than this one, but it's for another time for sure.
Yeah.
That's Jake. I'm Chris. The name of the documentary is called Back and Forth. We got more reviews coming your way next on The Screen Team.